Every company in the world is facing the same problem. Their teams are getting buried in more information than ever, and there's never enough time to get through it.
Only 5% of staff make it past the first few lines of any internal update.
So when crucial details are truly needed, to spur growth or make critical decisions, they're often 10 days back in an overlooked email or lost in a long winding thread. In short, the team stalled on progress, and you're left to answer all the same questions again. Axios can put an end to lost time. We know that clear, efficient communication is the lifeblood of any company, and we've nailed the most effective way to break through the noise and keep readers hooked in a tool we call Axios HQ.
Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Jim VandeHei. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Axios, and we're here to talk about this wild shift in the power dynamic between employer and employee, what we call the big idea of the Great Resignation, this trend that you see unfolding across the country and in your own workplace, where employees just have a lot more choices of where they're going to work physically and the company that they're going to work for. We're going to unpack this dynamic and hopefully equip you with things to know and in terms of how you navigate this trend. We have a cool lineup of panelists who have expertise in this area, people that we at Axios have relied on in the past, whose wisdom we want to bring to you. John Clifton, who's a global managing partner at Gallup, who will help us understand what's driving this shift. He's an expert in polling data. We have Lisa Osborne, the CEO of Edelman U.S., where she both leads an organization but also advises organizations on how to communicate and how to navigate this moment. And finally, we have Brad Burns at Salesforce, the CCO, who will share strategies for driving engagement and retention at his organization. To kick off the conversation, I'm pleased to be joined by John Clifton, Global Managing Partner at Gallup. John, thanks for joining us.
Jim, thank you for having me.
So you spend your days marinating in data. Gallup's been collecting data since the late 1930s. I think the way to ground this conversation is to think about data and what we're seeing in terms of what employers and employees think and want in what is a pretty wild moment, I think, for all of us. What does the data tell us?
Yeah, so this conversation around the Great Resignation is fascinating to a lot of people, precisely because when we look at this concept of employee engagement, which effectively means people's emotional attachment to their work, right now we see that employee engagement is the highest that we've ever seen it in the history of our tracking in terms of, again, how people feel about their work. In 2000, when we first started quantifying it, 26% of people were engaged. And today that number is 36, which is actually a slight increase even before the pandemic.
Why is that? I think that's a little surprising. I think a lot of people assume that given the rate of turnover that they're seeing and just given the overall kind of funk people are in, that people will be less engaged. Does the data tell us why?
Well, I think one reason that people are more engaged compared to 20 years ago is because management strategies are changing. For a very long time, people said, just promote the best person in the job to become boss. And one of the problems with that is when you promote someone who's a technical expert, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have the knowledge or the skills to become a great manager. So a lot more companies are taking the very skill of management seriously, and we can see that it pans out in the data. But to your point about what's happening now with the pandemic and who's leaving, the very intent to look for a job has not changed from 2019 to 2021. The reason we know that is because we annually ask people, are you actively looking for a job? And we find that 40% were in 2019 and 40% still are today.
And when you look at the data, what does it tell us about what an employee expects today versus, say, 5 or 10 years ago? Has that changed in terms of their expectations of what they want from an employer or what type of communications they expect from their employer?
Well, look, there are a lot of things that employees expect. I mean, money is a big expectation for employees everywhere. And I don't want to pretend that employee engagement is a panacea for massive pay increases. In fact, we find that if you offer on average a 20% increase, even to someone who's completely engaged in their job, they will look at that particular job. But again, that's not necessarily who's moving right now. In fact, we find among those that are actively disengaged in their job, it's 75% of them right now that are actively looking for new work. They seem to be the ones, including the ones that are not engaged, they're actually making this move because any increase in pay will cause them to leave that job.
And what's their gripe? Are they leaving because they feel like, why aren't they engaged? Why don't they feel an attachment? Is there underlying data that's, well, it's because of the communications, or they just don't like the company, they don't like the culture, a little bit of all?
There are a number of drivers, but there are kind of three that stick out right now. One is development. People looking for opportunities to develop, grow in their roles, or grow into a new role is critical for organizations. A second one is whether or not people feel attached to the mission or purpose of their organization. We find that only 33% of people really strongly agree to that question when we ask them, do you feel that strong attachment to the mission and purpose of the company? And the last one are the relationships at work. And I know that there are a lot of executives that might hear concepts like this and hate to talk about it, but it's true. In fact, there's even been a study, I think it was among 40 countries, where this organization actually looked and said, what are the single biggest drivers to whether or not an employee is satisfied in their job? And what they found that the biggest driver were the interpersonal relationships in a workplace. In fact, it was a bigger contributor than pay. So these are the emotional things that actually contribute to the stickiness as to whether or not somebody will leave or stay in a job.
This sort of work from everywhere or work from home phenomenon is relatively new. Do you have much data how that's affecting our expectations of an employer, or our expectations or shortfalls of communications?
Without question. Work from home is now becoming an expectation for a number of employees. In fact, there are about 2 in 10 employees that say, I'd like to work from home forever. There's another 3 in 10 that say, no, I'd primarily like to go into an office. The 5 in 10 that are in the middle say, no, I'd actually like to do both. So executives do need to be thinking about meeting the needs of employees around where they want to work. There was a separate study that said there are many people that would take up to a 30% pay cut in order to be able to remain working from home. So again, this is a massive consideration that if you want to maintain your stars, maintain your talent, you need to meet them where they are.
John, this is all very fascinating, and the data is so illuminating. When you think about Gallup, as we sort of wrap up, we think about your own employer. You look at the data. I hope and pray that you probably live by your own data. How have you changed? Like, how have you changed as a leader, or how has Gallup changed as an organization as this data has come in the door?
Well, I think one of the single best things that organizations can do is listen to their employees. So not only do we do surveys at a national level, but of course we do that within our own organization to try to make decision-making as participatory as possible. And I think some of the best organizations do that. As was reported in Axios this morning, Disney actually did a survey of their unions about whether or not they supported mandatory vaccinations. I think that was an excellent participatory process. Now, again, because 75% said that they did actually support making vaccines mandated, of course, that means 25% either said nothing or that they disagreed with it. But that participatory process is critical because we find that one of the key elements of engagement is whether or not people feel like their opinions count. And that's one of the single best ways to make sure that they count. And Gallup does that every day.
John, thank you for this fascinating conversation. For people watching at home, we have found Gallup to be a great partner when we're trying to study some of these topics, either journalistically or even for our own company, our own edification, so we can be a better employer. John is great. Gallup is great. And we really appreciate your time and your wisdom on this, John.
Jim, thank you for having me.
It's now my pleasure to bring to the virtual stage my friend Lisa Osborne Ross, who is the CEO of Edelman USA, and Brad Burns, the Chief Communications Officer at Salesforce. Thank you guys for joining me.
Happy to be here.
Good to see you.
Lisa, you're in a unique position. You both run a big organization over at Edelman, but you also advise companies about their business, their workplace, about their communications. When you think about this moment, you know, the events called the Great Resignation, like just the sort of the turmoil, the change that you're seeing inside companies, like reflect on that. Like, how do you see it playing out at Edelman and the companies that you work with?
One, I refuse to let it intimidate me or frighten me or make me nervous. This great resignation that we're talking about is really a matter of course. People come to organizations and people leave organizations. I know that we're seeing large numbers now, and I think it actually reflects what's happened during this last really tumultuous period where people are rethinking their values. And so if people are thinking what I'm doing is not right for me, and I now know that, I applaud anybody who makes a move to do something that feels right for them. Simultaneously, we also are trying to bring in talent who now recognize, you know what, I wasn't doing something purpose-driven before, and now I can by coming to Edelman. So I embrace it. I understand it, I get it, and I embrace it.
And Brad, at Salesforce, you help run an empire. That's a massive company. You guys bought Slack. You are integrated into most big companies. You have a huge staff yourself. I take a crack at that same question. Like, how do you see things, whether it's different today or just sort of unfolding in real time from your perch?
Well, look, it's all about being resilient. We're a really fortunate company. We have been growing at 20% year over year over the last 22 years. And it's, again, the pandemic has been one of those pivot moments for everybody. I don't know about you, but I don't know a lot of people who changed jobs for the first year of the pandemic. And I'm not sure how much of this is a reflection of kind of that coming through the system or not. But look, when I joined Salesforce 3 years ago, we were at 21,000 employees. Today, we're at 65,000. In the next 2 to 3 years, we'll be probably 100,000 employees. So when we look at the opportunity, the best thing that we can do is to attract the best talent, continue to tell our story about why Salesforce is a great place to work, always one of the best places to work, and continue down our path.
Lisa, over the years, you and I have talked a lot about culture. We've shared a stage talking about culture once or twice. When you think about your employees, or you just think about sort of the generic employee out there, how have their expectations changed? Do you feel like your expectation of an employer has changed, is changing, and in what ways?
Oh God, yes. It is such, and you and I have talked about this, it is such a dynamic and I think interesting and invigorating requirement from leadership now, from CEOs, because employees expect you to say something. They expect you to believe in something. They expect you to have purpose and to drive purpose in the organization. And for the work that we do, our sweet spot is advising clients who say, you know what, there's something wrong and I think I can fix it. There's an opportunity that I think that I can achieve, I can go after and make better. And so for us, that's the sweet spot. And I can't advise clients to find their purpose and to understand their mission and to speak up and say something if I don't do that myself. I just don't have the credibility. So culture is everything. And this is a employee-driven environment. And I welcome it. I think it's exciting and I think it's challenging. I'm not going to pretend like it's not, but I think it's exciting and I think it levels up all of our games.
Brad, as you mentioned, Salesforce is huge, right? Like you have more employees than there are people in my hometown of Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And you guys are often named one of the better employers, especially in the tech sector. How do you see the employee expectation changing? Does your average person who comes in the door, do they want something different than maybe you or I wanted when we entered the workforce?
Yeah, I mean, when you do have a large company, you have all types of expectations that you're dealing with, right? I mentioned our growth rate and how many employees we have. We've had 20,000 employees join us since the pandemic. That's 20,000 employees who likely have not set foot in one of our offices around the globe. So when we talk about culture and we talk about alignment, it's a challenge for us because we're really rethinking. We had such a very strong physical office culture before the pandemic. we pivoted. Here we are in a pandemic world now where virtual is going to be a huge part of our lives going forward, no matter what. As far as we're concerned, the past is gone, and we're operating the way we're going to be operating for a very, very long time. So how do you bring people along? How do you grow your culture? What does that culture look like in a more virtual world? And we've got a lot of plans. Our employee success HR team, to most people, is unbelievable in how they've helped pivot our culture, keep people aligned. The one thing that we do use is what we call our V2 MOM. It's visions, values, methods, obstacles, and measurement. It's a system that we've operated the company by over the last 22 years. It is scaled with the company. It is forever with us, and it keeps us aligned. It's wrapping our culture around it and giving those 20,000 employees who are new to us that foundation of culture and alignment and purpose within our company.
Lisa, people love tips, tricks, hacks. What are some things that you've learned as a leader, but also in advising companies that works in terms of communicating? A big focus of this, a lot of people watching the program are communicators, are working at companies trying to think about engagement. What are some things that you've learned that you think would be applicable anywhere?
So first, let me say congrats to all the communicators, because this is clearly our time. There used to be that with the CEO was the CFO that was sitting right next to him or her, more likely him. But now communicators are right in the C-suite. They are key advisors, and it's such an incredibly exciting time for us. And the tips that I have for them are the tips that I quite frankly live by myself. One, I have to know what my folks are interested in. I have to know what bothers them, and I have to know what worries them, and I have to know what their hopes and dreams and aspirations are. I have to be honest, and I hate the word because it's overused, but authentic. And I have to recognize too that not everyone is going to agree with everything that I say, but if I say it from my heart and I can defend it, then I'm comfortable with it. And the last thing that I think I've learned over the past few years, and it's not just like COVID related or the murder of George Floyd and everything that we're going through right now, but it's just the cycling of business and industry. I have learned that, you know what, it's okay to not know. It's okay to not have an answer. It's okay to not be able to predict the future. But as long as you are informed and you are conscious of needs and you're trying to do the right thing, then you can proceed.
Brad, in terms of the hacks, the tricks, the tips, imagine that I'm a small business owner, or I run a not-for-profit, or I'm just a manager with a couple of people underneath me. But what are some things that you've learned sitting at the sort of top of the communications field that would work for me?
Yeah, I've worked for early stage startups, small companies. I've worked for Fortune 10 companies. I've been kind of all over the map. And the one thing that's been consistent wherever I've been, it's all about trust, transparency, and connection. And the trust and transparency that we create as communicators is gold. I don't care whether you're a two-person shop or a Fortune 500 company. For me, it begins and ends there, just for credibility and purpose. Edelman's done a lot of great research that's talked about how business is the most trusted source of information for their employees. The employers are. We've done research at Salesforce that shows that 75% of our employees trust the information that their manager shares with them most. That's unbelievable. And what that puts on people, and the importance, to Lisa's point, of communicating openly and transparently and with trust as your number one value, more important than ever.
And as we wrap up, I think we're all looking for clever, surprising ways to drive engagement. One of the things that we're doing in Axios in the month of September is we're doing a show for employees only called COVID Sucks, Axios Rocks, where we talk about gossip in the media, what we're doing as a company, just trying to figure out how do you bring those people who are new to the company into the fold. Lisa, anything that surprised you that's worked at a personal level that you've seen another company do that might be useful to somebody else?
I don't know that I've seen anything that's surprising, but I do think that I am seeing companies, and we are certainly doing it, have to do exactly what you just outlined and be so creative in your communication. You know how competitive I am, Jim, and so I have up-leveled our internal staff meetings, our U.S. town halls to like production level events. And now that I've heard what you're doing, I'm going to have to do that at Edelman. So, it's Brad said it, trust is foundational, transparency is important. I always say that with everything that you do, you have to proceed with a pure heart, but thick skin, because not everybody's going to like it. And I think a silver lining of COVID has been this emphasis on culture and this emphasis on our most important asset, and that is our employees and our colleagues.
And Brad, any pleasant surprises in your world that have worked, especially in this work from home COVID era?
Yeah, well, our acquisition of Slack was kind of a game changer for our company, and moving to that technology and being able to collaborate better and get work done faster has been spectacular for us. But I have to tell you, as much as I like to talk about how our communications team is the most sophisticated and innovative and has reimagined everything during this pandemic, the one thing that has shocked me most is something so simple, and it really grounded me in reimagining and the importance of it. But you don't have to make it complicated. We started sending out a daily email to all of our employees every single day. An email, not the most innovative in today's world technology. And in it, it talks about what happened today and what's going to happen tomorrow. And we have an open rate every single day of almost 70% by 65,000 employees. Unbelievable to me. And the secret sauce in it, it's not because it's an email, because we all have plenty of those. It's an email that is written with humor, it's punny, it's engaging, and it has become destination reading for our company. So you know what? Reinventing and reimagining, it doesn't have to be complicated. It has to be creative and it has to be engaging. But that certainly has shocked me over the last 18 months.
What a fascinating conversation. Thank you, Lisa Osborne Ross. Thank you, Brad Burns, for joining us, for sharing your wisdom, and have a great day.
Thanks, Jim. Good seeing you, Brad.
Great to see you as well.
What a great and illuminating conversation. Really grateful to John, to Lisa, and Brad for sharing their wisdom. In many ways, it's a reassuring conversation. Yes, a lot of people are changing jobs. Yes, there's a lot of change in the workplace. But I think what you heard from all three is that if you ground yourself in a solid culture, if you communicate what you stand for, if you communicate transparently the things that you're doing as a company, you can continue to have strong engagement, even when people are scattered around the country and around the world. Also interesting to hear how some of the techniques that we've used over the years are still as effective as ever. Brad mentioned email. We run our entire company on our software, HQ. I communicate weekly. Every manager communicates weekly with their people. So there are ways to break through their clutter. There are ways in this new world to make sure people stay engaged, stay excited, and stay in your workplace. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for caring about the topic. And thank you for trusting in Axios.
We work in a cluttered and distracted world, which is why Axios HQ is helping teams big and small format clearer, more efficient internal updates. Colleagues get the news they need and nothing more to stay productive at work. Axios HQ, write less, say more.